Ernesto Guevara was born in 1928 in Argentina to an upper-middle-class family. From his early days, Ernesto was a very passionate reader. He read everything he could get his hands on. Fascinated by authors such as William Faulkner, Pablo Neruda, Franz Kafka, and so on, there is no doubt that his later ideology was in great part shaped by the works of these men. Even the CIA, which eventually had quite a file on Guevara, later declassified documents that said, quote, "Che is fairly intellectual for a Latino." All these books left Ernesto eager to explore the huge world around him. After enrolling in Buenos Aires University to study medicine, he decided to go on a motorcycle journey with one of his friends that would take him through most of South America. In Chile, Guevara witnessed the wrongdoing of many of the American-owned mines that were treating the local population like garbage. He saw with his own eyes the enslavement of the common man by landlords and foreign-owned enterprises. Ernesto visited Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Panama, and Florida, after which he came back home. This trip awakened Guevara. He began to perceive Latin America as a single entity, begging to be rescued from poverty, hunger, and disease brought by the new colonists. After finishing his studies and officially becoming Dr. Guevara, Ernesto didn't hang around long. He was soon in Guatemala, a country with a democratic and left-leaning government. This was, however, soon to change. The United Fruit Company, owned by the US, wasn't too pleased with the Guatemalan president handing out its land to poor peasants and all. Not long had passed and the US organized a coup and turned Guatemala into a dictatorship. Ernesto was, he was shocked, to say the least. A democratic government overthrown by the US? No. It was in Guatemala that Ernesto had first come into contact with Fidel and Raul Castro, along with their group of Cuban exiles. They nicknamed him Che after the phrase he frequently used, and Che meant something in the lines of bro. Since resistance in Guatemala had proven to be futile, Cuba was to be his next stop. Batista, the American-backed dictator, was in Che's words, a US puppet whose strings needed cutting. Fidel's enormous force of 82 men was attacked by Batista's army as soon as they set foot on Cuba and was reduced to just 22. Fleeing for his life, Che was given the choice of taking with him a box of ammo or medical supplies. No doubt a symbolic moment in his path of revolution. Che treated his comrades, but was not known as being a delicate doctor, instead pretty rough. On the other hand, his willingness to confront death and risk life on battlefield made Fidel promote him to Comandante. A charismatic but extremely strict guy, he could punish men for something minor with a few days without food. During his time in Sierra Maestra, Che was also the one responsible for taking care of informers and spies. He usually prescribed them a bullet to the head. A self-taught expert in guerrilla warfare, hit-and-run tactics were no doubt Che's bread and butter. He and his men would approach an enemy camp at night and fire at them with whatever they had, then quickly disappear into the forest before anybody could react. So every day, soldiers were thinking about the bomb that would explode that night or who would be killed next. Not too good for morale, as you might imagine. Naturally, a couple of weeks at most and the soldiers would pick up their stuff and leave. Che Guevara had already seen the impact of US propaganda in their coup in Guatemala several years earlier. One of Che's most valuable contributions was the creation of a pirate radio station named Radio Rebelde. Fidel's men used it as a means to transmit messages through all of Cuba and spread their ideas. The decisive victory of the Cuban Revolution would arrive at Santa Clara. Although Fidel's forces were outnumbered 10-1, most of Batista's army immediately surrendered. Understandably, they did not want to die for a lost cause and a man who they had no sympathy for. For most people, the revolution was over, but for Che, it had just begun. Please like and share if you enjoyed this video, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next week!